Welcome back. I'm really happy today because we have invited back. I love when we're inviting back people
I
because we
know.
know it was such a great one the first time. So we've invited back someone we couldn't wait to have back. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, but I'm also going to ask Lisa to make sure we put the link to her previous um, episode with us last season because this is why we wanted her back. You're gonna re-meet Monica Lynne today. She's an AASECT-certified sex and relationship therapist who has a thriving practice called Balancing Life, PLLC. We will have links where you can find her and learn more about her and follow her. She has a background in health and fitness, having been a sexuality educator at the high school level for a lot of years in her early career days, followed by 30 years in the fitness, nutrition, wellness coaching industry, and now currently a business owner in her practice, working with individuals and couples around sexuality, health of self, and relationships, and optimizing quality of life. Monica's biracial, open minded, non judgmental, ethnically diverse, cultured woman who is passionate about being of service to others, which is also evidenced by the fact that you're back here because we begged you back. And I appreciate you making the time. And one of the things that we were like, we got to have you back. We have so many people who listen, and we try to bring in things about menopause and relationships and sexual vibrancy. And it's hard when life feels hard and the world seems hard. And yet it's so important in women's empowerment. And so just in trying to figure out what we were going to talk about, you had some great suggestions. So welcome back. I
Thank you.
know Lisa's really excited too. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, my
Yeah, it's
pleasure.
like I think you're our she's our first return. I mean, we have a few more people coming that have been on our past episodes, but I think Monica's our first return guest.
Yes. I mean, we had Krista do two in a row when she came and she's
True.
a naturopath and talk about menopause and stuff. But yes, this is our first return. Thank you.
I know. And I mean, we started thinking about how we could get you back almost immediately.
Yes.
And I also want to point out that at the end of the year, last year, end of season two, I put you as my one of my favorite episodes from season two. I
Wow.
just thought,
Right.
yeah, I mean, I love that last little bit. I can't read verbatim or repeat verbatim, but just the inclusiveness, the biracial, like everything about you just screams this pod.
That is so nice to hear. I feel so complimented and honored. Thank you.
One of the things that was great about the end of that, towards the end of that episode, was you kind of turned the tables on us, and we were like, yeah, you were like, I want to ask you questions, and you did, and it was so fun for us to like, kind of be in that seat. And so you had a great suggestion for today, and I was like, yeah, cool, you moderate it. Which is, let's talk about, our sensuality and our sexual vibrancy through the decades, because not just because we have listeners at all ages, but because it's really helpful to understand who we are as sexual beings. When we're trying to understand, why does this feel different? Why do I feel differently, and what is attraction? And I mean, we kind of are starting to understand that out in the world, but there's still so little knowledge about how hormones are affecting all of that, and environment and stress and all of that. So thank you.
Well, and when you say that, Kari, it makes me think, yes, not only do we have women in all decades listening to this pod, but one of my favorite reflections from way back in the day was from my son's girlfriend who is in her 20s, and she loved listening to the pod because she wanted to hear that life doesn't end at 30, so that's one of the things I think is going to be so great about today so that no matter what decade you're in, you understand that you're not a shriveled up prune as far as sex is concerned.
Right, right. I agree in that way that I don't feel like anybody tells us what's ahead. Like you
Yep.
get the general message that you're supposed to like finish high school and go to college and get married and have children. And that in and of itself is a really limiting conformist kind of viewpoint that not everybody wants to do. But then even past that, nobody really tells you how hard kids are or how much
Hmm.
you're gonna love them. Nobody really tells you how to select a mate. Nobody really tells you what it's like to get divorced or like what it's like to be in your 50s or like there's no class, there's nobody talking about it unless you
No.
have a really good mom that's expressing all this to you. So yeah, I just think it's so important to have these conversations. So I'm so glad people are listening to you.
And I would add to it, or maybe it's just a rephrasing of something you just kind of already said, but I would add to it, nobody, and I'm speaking for myself, but probably for so many women, nobody taught you to like trust and like yourself and put yourself first. So, to trust yourself. I mean, we're hearing about it so much right now in the world. And I'm currently reading a book called The Well-Trained Wife, which is written by, someone who grew up evangelical and is, kind of really taking apart all of that and what that did to her self-esteem. But to not to not grow up in an environment or at a time where people were saying trust yourself, right? Trust yourself, learn to like actually trust your body. And so we all became disembodied, whether it was from trauma or training or or from just societal influences. We've become people that are just seeking all the answers outside ourselves. And so I'm so passionate about what you do, and just, not just, especially when you work with couples, not just helping women, trust themselves, but like really teaching men to respect that women, need to go through that process, and maybe that they can do their version of that too.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I love the work that I do.
So what decade do you want to start with?
So I'm going to start with 20s.
Okay.
And I took a ton of notes, so I'm going to be looking down a little bit. But so many strong feels about this, probably because I forget the age of your kids, Lisa, but I think we all have kids that are either in or entering this decade. And so
Yep.
if you're a listener right now and you're in your 20s, awesome, listen from your viewpoint. But if you're a listener that has kids in their 20s, also listen from the viewpoint of how could you share some of this with your kids, and how could you express this message to them if you haven't already. So one of the things I think that's happening a lot in our 20s, late teens and 20s, or whatever, teens and 20s, is that people are exploring their sexuality, right? And so when I talk to people, and this, and I just want to make a statement actually before I even go into this, that when I'm talking, like, I work with all types of people. I work with queer couples, I work with cishet people. Like, when I'm talking and I say partners or whatever, I wish there was a word that was just absolutely inclusive of every type of couple, but that's what I'm talking about. And so we also have, through the ages, societal messages are changing. And so some, like, people that are in their 50s and coming out as a different sexual orientation are having a very different experience than kids that are in their teens or 20s right now, thankfully.
Yeah.
So that said, that what I'm saying is only one perspective, right? It's my lived experience and my professional experience that I'm including. And so this is not like a blanket statement. I don't want to express that I'm saying a truth. It's just my truth that I've, gained from working with people. But it seems like overall, a lot of times, like, if you identify as a woman or you're raised societally as a woman, you end up being a little bit more coupley in your late teens and your 20s. And I don't know if that's biologically. I don't know if because we are more fertile in those years that perhaps we are almost drawn to wanting to settle down with somebody or be coupley, or, like, even if you don't want kids right away, it might be biologically in us. And it seems that young men are often not in that place. They want to be sowing their oats more, and maybe that's also biological. It could be that that spreading of the seed is what keeps the species going. And so, and then that seems to flip a bit. Like, as you get later into your 20s and 30s, sometimes women are like, yeah, I don't need somebody right now. Like, I'm on my own. And the guys are kind of like, wait, I want to settle down and have a family. And so I think the 20s are a lot of exploration. And the thing that I don't think people are told is that if you are looking for a long-term mate or marriage, that is like the single most important decision you will ever make in your whole life, right? And at that time, a lot of times people are being told, like, pick the right major and get the right job and save up for a house and spend your money wisely and all these things. And it's like, none of that matters if you pick the wrong person. And so the compatibility question is what I would really put out for people in their 20s, because sometimes you're meeting people in high school or in college and they look good on paper, right? Like, oh, we have the same spiritual or religious beliefs, or, oh, we, are some from the same socioeconomic status, or we want to do the similar things in the way of travel or jobs. And those are all great on paper, but you could find hundreds of people that matched you in that way. But the compatibility interpersonally is the thing that is the game changer for a relationship working or not working. So when I have people in their 30s and 40s and 50s coming to me and saying, yeah, we met when we were 18 or 22 or whatever, we've been married for 10, 15, 20 years and it's not working. A lot of times it's the things that are more about the compatibility between the two people. And so that would be things like, are we socially compatible? You know, maybe he's a huge extrovert and she's a total introvert, you know, or she's, you know, very intellectual and she is really very lighthearted and just likes to go adventure. And so if you don't match socially, that sometimes can be a draw in the beginning, sort of that opposites attracts, but eventually it can be really hard on the relationship. And I think sexually speaking, the thing I hear the most is when people say, yeah, we never really had that chemistry in the beginning. So
Mm-hmm.
couples, and I think I talked about this last time when
You did, and that
yeah,
I've thought of that so many times.
yeah, if you
Not for me
don't,
personally,
yeah,
but just like in general, like that was
right.
there was so I think that's why your episode was so impactful for me in season 2 because there were so many things that I was like, holy shit, that's exactly right. And that
Mm,
was one of them. This
yeah,
if you've never had it, can you get it?
right.
Yeah.
And if you're in your 20s and you're listening right now and you're like, but this person is so great. They're so great on paper and they make me laugh and we're so good and our families get along. And yet we have no sexual spark. I mean, that is the only thing that differentiates them from a friend, you know, like if you don't
Yeah.
have the sexuality and the romantic part of it, that and you don't have, I mean, people say that if they have somewhat of a spark in the beginning, that sex certainly can get better the better you get to know each other's bodies. But I don't know that if you don't have any spark or chemistry in the sexual arena, that you're actually going to have a long-lasting, great sex life. And that can be really important to people. And for some people, it's really important. And for some people, it's not. And so you could have somebody who doesn't really feel strongly about the sexual component partnered with somebody who feels very strongly about it. And then later in life, that person that feels really strongly about it is unsatisfied. And the other person's like, well, I'm fine. Like, I don't really need sex that much. It's not really my love language. And the other person's like, but it's totally mine. And now we're 5 years in or 10 years in and 2 kids later, and we aren't compatible anymore. And so it's so painful for kids and for families and separation and divorce. And so that's probably that. And then the other one that is really heart-wrenching in my practice to watch is people not in their 20s and teens, not exploring their sexual orientation.
Mm.
And there are so many people, if you look at like, you know, the spectrum of sexuality, there's actually very few that are very homosexual and very heterosexual. Most people actually fall somewhere in the bisexuality range as far as, you know, not necessarily that they want to be experiencing it, but they might be attracted to it. They might like
Hmm.
watching, you know, it's something in that spectrum. And so when people are not giving themselves permission to really explore that, then what happens in my office is I have several clients where they are 5 or 10 years, 15 years in, and 1 or 2 kids later, and they identify as bisexual at that point. And they're like, but I've never actually had an experience with the same gender. So I don't really know what it would be like. I don't know how important this is to me. I don't know if I would like it even better. And so now you have one partner that has an identity that's so important to them, and they feel somewhat confused and somewhat like they've stifled it, and somewhat like they're not able to be their whole genuine authentic self. And then you have this other partner that's like all of a sudden feeling blindsided, like this isn't what I signed up for. I didn't know this about you. They might be really monogamous, and the thought of letting their partner explore sexually is terrifying to them and totally you know, it causes upheaval in the relationship. And how do you even win in that? Like I feel so much compassion for both people when I have clients in that position. And so I just think back to, and all of them, hands down, every single one of them says, I knew this way earlier. I knew this in my teens. I knew this and I didn't pursue it because my family would have squashed it. Religious beliefs made me feel shame. You know, society made me feel scared, whatever. But they all are like, why didn't I just explore this in my 20s so that I understood myself better and I didn't impact a partner and a family system and kids and everything so much later? So that would be my other huge suggestion to people is if you have any part of you that feels like your sexual orientation is a little confusing or unclear to you, go explore it now before you're in a long-term committed relationship, especially with kids.
Wow. What what would you going back to the first piece of it, because I think that's very clear. But the part around the spark, the if you don't have the spark, but on paper everything else looks good, like I mean, in your 20s in a new relationship, you feel so tender already. Like, how do you broach that with your partner if you're not feeling that
Mhm.
spark
I
and
mean,
everything else is quote unquote great?
yeah,
Oh,
I,
that feels so, oh.
it is hard, but I think I mean, if you think about how I think it's always the people do what's easier or what they perceive as kinder in the short term without thinking about the long term. And so,
Mm,
yes, would it be hard to have that conversation today, tomorrow, this weekend with my partner about our intimacy and our compatibility? Sure. Would it be harder to have that conversation 10 years from now when we're looking at each other like, I just see you platonically? I don't desire you. I've wreaked havoc on your self-esteem and your self-worth and your attraction, attractability because you haven't felt desired by me in this long. Like that's going to be way worse. So transparency is like my biggest virtue and value. And so for me,
mm,
it's how do you just bring that? If you're not accusing somebody, you're not trying to belittle somebody or insult them. You're just coming to the table saying, what do you think about our intimacy? Like I
mm,
love this and this and
Mhm.
this about you. Do you find that you feel fully, like totally fulfilled or satiated by the way that we are affectionate with each other or our sexual connection? And just
Mm.
asking the questions with curiosity because the partner may be like, thank God you said that. Because no one, I have
yeah.
no
Yeah.
idea how to say it. And what do we do with this, and how much easier it is to talk about that if you're both being curious and transparent and just putting it on the table and then maybe deciding, God, we are really, really good friends. And I'd much rather stay super strong friends and not hurt each other or get resentful or hate each other down the road, but maybe we're not right for each other as far as a long-term committed relationship.
Hmm.
Mm.
So
You're facilitating these kinds of conversations when they're with you.
yes, I'm absolutely doing that with couples, but they're already at the point where they're in distress, right? People aren't coming to me
Mm.
before they're in distress. And so I have a huge desire to do couples workshops and do things with younger people like this.
Yeah.
My son goes to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and I do some Greek Rho sex ed talks down there because that audience, they're so hungry for the information, and it's relatable to them, and no one's really talking to them about it. But I just think all young people in their 20s should. I mean, it behooves them to go to either a couples workshop or go to a couples therapy. Like even if it's not broke, go explore, go learn a little bit more about
Yeah.
your relationship and the stability of your relationship, challenge it, see if you can, grow from it.
I love this so much. It reminds me, so I don't know if Lisa did this, but because I did get married in the Catholic Church, you go through pre-Cana or
Mm.
I don't even know. You have to go through a bit of a retreat ahead of time. And you know, don't want to get into all the things about, that people would have a problem around that. But, I remember one of the positives because it happened to be like a really cool, interesting priest that was facilitating it. One of them was like, talk about money. Like they bring up these subjects that people like are the main reasons people end up falling apart or they just don't know each other at a certain part, the things that become stressful. Do you both want to have kids? Like all that stuff. So the intention of that process is so good. And it would
Mhm.
be even better if like this was out there, right? And religion or not, if this was like in the mainstream, that you go through some sort of pre commitment course, whether you're getting married or moving in together. That
Yeah.
just is such a cool idea that's that you're both kind of saying, let's follow some framework of a way to start these conversations, right?
Yeah.
And maybe, I mean, maybe it would help people go, maybe not. And I'm not saying they should do that to break up, but maybe it will help them like walk in with an authentic connection versus like all these assumptions and all these fantasies.
Right. They should do it pre-engagement, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
if you're going to get engaged to get married or move in together, and maybe no, desire to get married, but you are doing something that's that big of a unifying, thing, why not go test your relationship out a little bit with professionals first? Because the other thing I think about is that I don't know if you both have heard this. I feel like most of us this age have heard it, is like nobody really changes. Like we can change and grow if we're motivated, but whatever it is that's happening in the early years of a relationship that drives you crazy, it's going to drive you crazy forever. So if somebody is chronically late and you're like, oh, okay, it's just kind of cute right now because I have all this new relationship energy and I'm like really into them, but you're a really timely person and that's going to bother you, that's not going to change. They're going to be untimely forever, right?
Yeah.
Or if somebody, I've had people in my office that are in their late 30s, mid to late 30s, and they're in distress and crisis in their relationship because one of them wants to have kids and one doesn't, and they never talked about it. And like, how did you get to the point of marriage and being together for 5 or 6 years and never asked each other if you wanted to have kids or not? But people don't necessarily talk, or people that are like, somebody might say, I see using porn as betrayal. And then the other person's like, I've been using porn since I was 14. I didn't know that. And now I don't know that I want to be in a relationship where I feel like I can't, or even some people feel that about masturbation. And so there's all of these topics and issues that if people aren't talking about them and you don't know, and then all of a sudden you're married and it's like, oh no, that's a game changer. That's too late. Like you should be talking about these things way earlier.
Mm.
I just keep going back to the what you just said around better to do it earlier. It would be it is going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but it is so much more painful when you have so many more years under your belt. Because then there's also the resentment of I just wasted fill in the blank years.
Yeah.
It will be uncomfortable, it will be hard, but you are saving yourself and the other person
Yeah,
a lot of heartache.
totally.
Mm,
Yeah, what you do in the short term that might feel like you're hurting somebody is kinder to them in the long term.
right.
Mm.
But I
So,
think the distress piece is interesting because, we know as coaches that most people don't make change until it's easier to make change than it is to stay where you are.
Mhm.
So the fact that, first of all, the word distress just breaks my heart a little bit every time you say it. It's just
Mhm.
like, oh, because,
Mhm.
I think that's just such a visual feeling to me. Yeah. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
done.
I was just
Well,
thinking too, also, like when to start these conversations around sex and intimacy, well, it goes into that thing Lisa and I always say, which, that we learned, which is how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Yeah.
When I see like two of my sons in relationships and what they're learning around having their needs met, emotionally, and how, well, like, well, I didn't want to bring that up, that bothered me because she was stressed about this, and it was like, but then you didn't have your need met, and
Hmm.
so that does block
mhm.
desire later. That does build, that either builds up or blocks right away. And
Mhm.
so we talk about that, but I think when you're working on that with sex and intimacy, it will spill over into your emotional connection because they're so linked. Could you talk a little bit about that and just baby couples?
Sorry, I was just writing down one thing. Tell me again the question, the link
Just
between.
do you find that? Because I'm guessing it does. Like if you're working with people around like how to explore and be really honest and get your needs met and express like, hey, I want to meet your needs, but here's mine. How do we, do you see that automatically like improves getting their emotional needs met too because they're so linked, or is that kind of different work?
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever somebody is, I mean, I think the first thing is that if you're in your 20s or any age, you have to be self-aware enough to know what your needs are. Like some people don't know that their needs are that they want somebody to be emotionally attentive to them or attuned to them, or that they have really high physical touch needs. And so if the first step is that you have to be self-aware enough to know what is it that is my love language and how do I feel loved? And then how is this person matching me in that? And then how am I able to talk to them about that? So, there's lots of people that are really high physical touch and their partner isn't, but they check all the other boxes. So they think, well, that's okay. Like I'll get massages, or I'll like, sometimes they'll get better at this. And
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily change. If you're somebody who was raised in a home where you don't express affection and you weren't hugged as a kid and that doesn't come naturally to you, it probably won't in relationship. And if you're partnered with somebody who's like, I love to be held, I love to be touched, I want my hair played with, I want a back rub, I want, you to hold my feet, whatever it is, like, I just want to be close to you, then you have to be able to talk about that. And I think one of the other really big ones, that's actually what the note that I was just making when you asked the question that distracted me is, I don't know, are you guys familiar with the term demisexual?
Mm-mm.
No.
So demisexual means that you have to be emotionally connected to somebody before you can access your own sexuality. So somebody who can go to, and in your 20s, it's probably a little bit easier because sex is a little newer to you and you might be a little bit, more in your prime and fun. But people who can go have a one night stand and have a really fun time and have a hot experience would likely not be as demisexual. They're like, I'm just attracted to the person, the experience, the heat, the chemistry, their body. But another person may say, like, I can't actually feel sexual unless I know you, unless we've talked, we've had a conversation. I feel safe with you. You know a little bit about me. I know a little bit about you. What I know is attractive. It starts me leaning in. Oh, now I'm able to access the fact that I'm feeling aroused or turned on. And there's a lot more people that are demisexual. And so oftentimes you have men who are being raised in this society with the images from porn of how they're supposed to show up with virility, and women who are showing up with performativeness because that's what porn is teaching them. And so they're not actually vibing on a level of authenticity. They're doing what it is that society has shown them is important or valued. And so then you get into relationship, and if you're somebody who's like, I really like to be emotionally attuned to, and your person's not very good at that, then sex becomes just sex and it's not very good sex. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I had a man in my office a couple weeks ago, and I just thought it was the sweetest thing in the world. He was beating himself up for being demisexual. He didn't know the term, but he said basically, I can't do one night stands. And I said, okay. And he said, and guys berate me for this. Like,
Mm.
I'll have an opportunity for somebody, like he said this, well, I won't say it, but like he explained a situation. He's like, any guy would be like, dude, what are you thinking? Why didn't you say yes? And he's like, I can't say yes to stuff like that. And I'm like, that is fantastic. Like, that just means that you know yourself well enough to know that you need to have an emotional connection before you can be sexually turned on. And for him as a guy, that's not valued. Guys make fun of you,
Right.
right? And so it's actually, and then you tell a lot of females that, and they're like, oh, swooning. Like, where can I find a guy like that? So we just give people some really weird messages. And so I think, again, for what, I don't know if I'm answering your question, Kari, but if you're able to say, like, I really need somebody who can emotionally attune to me. I want you to be able to listen to me, to look me in the eyes, to listen to me in a way that you're trying to understand me, not looking for when can you respond. Like, those are really important things to know about yourself. And so if you're not talking about those conversations, you're not having those conversations, then you might end up being paired with somebody that is not compatible with you for the
Mm.
long. But your 20s are like when sex is the easiest to access, so if you're not having good, authentic, genuine, organic sex in your 20s with somebody and you're not getting your needs met, I mean, that is just full of information.
Well, yeah. It reminds me of when my kids used to ask how old do you have to be to get married. And I've always said, you don't have to get married, but if you're going to choose a life partner, you should be 30.
I tell my kids too.
I would just say that. And they would say, but you got married at 26. I'm like, I'm really lucky he still makes me laugh and I enjoy kissing him, because I don't think people know who they are before 30. And that's an arbitrary age. Many people mature way sooner than I did. And many people don't know who they are till 40. But I would say likely you're still getting, and so you just validated that, even though that was a very arbitrary, unfounded thing to say on my part. You're validating the idea that 20s is sounding like it's really about going inward and identifying like what lights you up, what your pleasure is, and like how to articulate it and ask for it and own it. That feels like research.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it makes me think too, like they say now the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until 27. So why the heck would you pick a life partner at 23 if
Right.
your brain's not even developed, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
another thing you just said, struck something with me. Oh, just thinking of like when I taught sex ed at the high school level, one of the things that I would say is if you can't have the conversation with your partner of what would we do if we got pregnant? And they're like, oh, I couldn't talk about that. That's embarrassing. I could, and then I'm like, oh, then you're not ready to have sex. If you can't talk
Right.
about what you would do if you got an STI or got pregnant, then you are not ready to have sex with this person. So similar thing to answer your question, Lisa, if you're in your 20s and you're dating somebody, even if you've been dating them for a month, a year, 5 years, and you are scared to have the conversation of, is our sexuality compatible? You shouldn't be getting married. Like if that conversation can't be happening already, then you're not ready to be in that serious of a relationship. That's a little judgmental on my part, but I
Well, but
think,
it's, I mean, you said it at the beginning, though. This is your professional experience and your lived experience. So, we say this a lot in the pod because this is the things we know.
yeah.
We're not saying this is the end all be all, but you
Yeah.
are the expert here and this is your professional experience. So I think it's valid.
Thank you for that.
Hmm.
Should we move into the 30s?
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay. So I put down in the 30s that for, and this is different for everybody depending on when they, are bonded with people, but sometimes in your 30s, you might be planning weddings, you might be dealing with marriage, you might be having kids, you might be, finding the depth of your career. But what all of those things equal is just a huge amount of stress, right? And so I always tell clients that the best sex happens when you feel safe with your partner, when you trust your partner, and when you're relaxed. And it's really hard to access all of those things when you're really stressed. So as we get into our 30s and we're starting to do more adulting, then the stress is going up and adulting can be super stressful. So sometimes for people in their 30s, sex can actually be less exciting and fun. Like you have more breaks. To Emily Nagoski, who wrote Come As You
Love
Are,
her.
she talks about brakes and accelerators, right? And so when you have all these stressors, then all of these breaks are going to make it a little bit harder to access your sexuality. So for some people, it might be because they're having kids also in this decade. And so that also puts a big break in there. And one of the things that I also wish that people were told way, way younger, if people think about, if you're looking at like a cishet male female couple or not, if you're, two gay men or women or whatever, however you are acquiring this family, if somebody's pregnant, and so I guess not for two gay men, but for like any woman who's pregnant, she's going to have to make a lot of sacrifices for those 9 months, right? Like she's not going to be eating cold cuts with preservatives and she's not going to eat shellfish and she's not going to be drinking and all those things, maybe not caffeine. And during those 9 months, I'm sure that her partner, whoever that partner is, would be supportive of that. If you're a really supportive partner, I think both people should be making those sacrifices so that you're not just asking the person who's carrying a baby to make those, but both of you are in this collaboratively together. So both of you are taking a 9-month hiatus from alcohol, from all the different foods you can't eat and all those things. And then if you think past that, almost everyone still, this is archaic to me, but they still get the green light from their doctor post birth, whether it's vaginal or I didn't have C-section, so maybe it's different for C's, but 6 weeks before you can have sex, right? And if you delivered vaginally, you just had the most trauma a vagina could ever experience. So 6 weeks to me is so strange and random and
Yeah.
arbitrary and too short, right? Like I don't know that many people. Most women I know that did that then was because they did it for their husbands, not because they wanted to.
Right.
So the other thing that I always think of is if you are willing to say, I want to do everything to make sure that my partner for those 9 months is treating their body so healthfully for for this baby, you should also take a step back and go, well, then their bodies are actually wired for the next 2 years to be completely focused on this child. That is how a maternal brain is wired, so that we get, you know, the most species, the survival of the fittest here. So if your partner is going to be wired to meet all of the needs of this baby, health-wise, nutritionally, developmentally, everything, they are not likely going to feel very sexual. They are not there for your sexual fulfillment. They are there to keep this child alive. And if more people went into it knowing, oh, okay, so this isn't just like the 6 weeks post birth, it's going to be part of the 9 months. I mean, sometimes people are really sick the first half and they don't want to. Sometimes they're so uncomfortable the second half they don't want to. So you might be looking at sparser sexual connection in those 9 months, no sexual connection for those 6 weeks, and little desire from your partner for 2 years after that. And then if you want to have another kid right around that 2 year mark, then you're just entering that again, right? So there can be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years in your 30s where people who are having kids, the partner who is birthing is not very interested in sex. And I don't think a lot of people grow up hearing that, knowing that, preparing themselves for that. Um, so that's like a big message. I think that's important.
I mean, for me, first off, super validating. But secondly, like, I just remember thinking, even beyond two, like, I hear what you're saying about the 2 years. Like, yes, obviously that makes total sense. But then you have children crawling all over you all day long. You're picking them up, you're wiping their butt, you're doing all the things. And so I'm gonna tell Darren not to listen to this episode, but like, he knows this, right? Like, I just was like, dude, this is the time of my life. We look back on this now
Yeah.
and say, I wasn't feeling it, not because I don't love you, not because I wasn't attracted to you, because I had humans crawling on me all day long. I was in charge of
Yeah.
humans all day long. Yeah, you worked, you left and you went to work and you did all these great things. Thank you. And also, like, I'm not, I want to go to bed. I just want to go to sleep.
Mhm.
You're
You
touched
know,
out. Like you're just touched out. You don't want any
totally
more.
Yeah.
touched out. Yeah. And, great. Now our kids are gone and totally different,
Yeah.
and I know we're gonna get
Mhm.
to the 50s later, but like that, I have validated myself when
Mhm.
the kids were no longer around, because I was like,
Mhm.
okay, this is right. I was right. This was about being crawled over all day long. This
Yeah.
wasn't about him.
Yeah.
This wasn't about my sexuality or my desire for sex.
Right. Right.
It was, yeah, there was like a certain draining that happened even, and there's some lovely things about it. It's just like that needs getting met subconsciously with a lot of affection. And then there's like actually a need for space. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, for me, like my first child was at 32, my third one was at 38. So when you said that about the 30s, I thought about that. The other thing that you talked about was whether it's childbearing years or career years, 30s tend to be a very focused kind of
Right.
place where, I mean, obviously it's different case by case, but if we're making generalities, I think about a lot of the women I worked with when I was in my 40s back in a full-time workforce, and they were in their 30s building their careers. And those women didn't like hit that stage of parenting until their early 40s.
Sure.
So it's fascinating because like if their 30s were based on like ramping up their career, that probably also affected their feelings of sexual vibrancy.
Totally. Right. Yeah. If they're super focused or getting up really early or have high powered jobs or whatever, they're also, maybe they're not touched out and, have kids, but they may be like, I have a 6 o'clock meeting. It's 9:30. Like, I'm not interested in sex right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this is going to be different for, everybody, like you said, depending on their case. But I think that it's also really hard though for a partner who is going to work and not the one that carried the baby or not the one home with them. And they are, getting some career social needs met, but they're coming home and being like, I haven't been touched at all today. Like I don't
Yeah.
hug people at
Yeah.
work. I'm not getting any touch. I'm not getting any affection. I'm not getting any energy that's like focused on me, and their partner's so focused on the child that they feel a sense of being sort of deprioritized themselves. And so I have a ton of compassion for both people, but it's like, okay,
Yeah.
so what do we do with that? And so one of the things that I would say is that if you're in these situations, whether it's because you have kids or whether it's because you have two really busy careers, that planning quality time for connection is the most important thing. And what I hear a lot of people say is like they plan plan or schedule time for sex. And most people don't like scheduling sex. They're just like, oh, that's kind of takes the fun out of it. And I'm always telling my couples clients or, individuals like, don't schedule sex and don't plan for sex, because then what you're doing is you're going in with it cold. And then it's like being at a stop sign. And then, to use Emily Nagoski again with the on-ramps and stuff, you're at a stop sign and then you're saying, just take that car and stick it on the freeway at 60 miles an hour, right? Like, you can't. There's a transition between there. That's why we have an on-ramp. That's why we accelerate. And so if you can instead get your head around, let's plan quality time for connection, meaning that we are looking at each other. We're giving each other a foot massage while we talk about our day. We're reading a book to each other while we're giving a foot massage or a hand massage. We are doing question cards with each other. We are going for a walk together. We are making dinner together, something where we're connecting. Let the byproduct be sex. Like, if we get to a place where we are light, we are connected, we are playful, we are feeling attracted to our partner, any of those things are happening, then maybe you're going to get to the on-ramp of like, I'm actually wanting to be close to you, and maybe that's just spooning or snuggling. And maybe it's, naked spooning, whatever it is, it might lead to sex, but don't go for the outcome is sex. So if you make the commitment to the connection rather than to the outcome of it being sex, that can take a lot of pressure off and make people have a lot more fun in that situation.
I mean, it makes total sense. And you're right, that's such a trope to sort of plan sex if you're so busy,
Yeah.
So I love that.
I have to just insert my Beavis and Butthead humor here, but naked spooning, we call that sporking. A spork is like a spoon and a fork.
Oh yeah.
It's like, doesn't really stay spooning.
But another thing that I always tell people too is they say that if, sometimes you have people where they're like, I know that if my partner says, can I give you a massage? It means it's going to lead to sex, right? And so then they start to like deter from physical affection because they're like, I don't want to do anything that's going to cause my partner to like then put that on me. And so what I tell people also is, do the fun things that make you feel connected, but just always have the agreement that if one person doesn't feel access to their sexuality, that they can say no, but offer something else. So if one partner's saying like, hey, do you feel like being sexual or do you want to connect later? They might be like, maybe. And then maybe at that time at night, they're, kissing or touching or something. And one person's like, I'm just not feeling it. Like, I can't do that, but I don't want to reject you. I love you and I want to be close to you. Can we just spoon, and that might be a good alternative because the other person might be like, yes, I'd love to have skin to skin contact with you. And I'd rather not have you say yes when you can't access desire for me, because that usually leads to some pretty crappy sex. Like when people are like, oh, okay, I'm going through the motions and my partner looks like they're looking at their watch or they're just like, okay, are you done?
Or the ceiling.
Awful. So having all that.
Admittedly, I watch way too much Sex in the City, but like so much of what you're saying, there is, I mean, Miranda and oh my God, whatever his name is.
Steve.
Thank you. I mean, this is a big storyline for them, where he's wanting to have sex. They have Brady and they haven't had sex in a long time and they finally connect and he wants it to go longer. And she's like, can't we just finish? And it's so like, and I just think
devastating.
It's devastating. Yeah. But I mean, if it can be in a television show, damn well this is happening on a regular basis. Yeah.
And this is when affairs happen too, right?
Sure.
Is when you have kids under like 6.
What happened?
That's right. So if you're feeling undesired and you're not having good communication and you're not spending time for quality connection, then you're gonna want something, like it's gonna be in your mind as a fantasy or it might be played out, and so if you're able to say like, this is gonna be a hard decade, this is gonna be tough, we have to plan things. And in that, if you're able to, well, I'm going to kind of move into the 40s, but this is 30s or 40s, depending again, like you said, Kari, like when you're going through these life stages.
Thanks everyone for listening to part 1 of Sensuality and Vibrancy Throughout the Decades with sex therapist Monica Lynne. This interview was so good and so juicy. It ran an hour and a half, so we decided to split it in half. And will be part 2 next week. So please come back and join us when Monica starts to discuss the next decades, including our own. And this isn't just for couples. This is for women who are in their 40s and 50s and they are out there dating. So please come back and join us for part 2 of Sensuality and Vibrancy Throughout the Decades. And as always, thanks for listening.